allows you transcripting and transcribing all the other things.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's not very accurate too.
Yeah.
It's starting point.
Yeah, it needs to be good, it's that it could say the wrong word.
Okay. So if I now go and share screen.
Could be interesting. We don't overload that.
Okay, we're sharing screen, we're recording. Can you move? That's the question with that.
Barry, would it be possible for our latecomers to just?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Apologies.
Alan Newbold, President of the University of Auckland. What is the correct for the thing? We will do my presentation together. My name is Stevie. I'm football captain. I'm here to support Alan and doing Alan.
Kia ora. I'll stay here, I think.
I think it's.
Oh, it's moving on this. It's not moving on that. Ah, okay, that's a worry. Stop sharing, reshare. Let's go. Always these issues. So slideshow. I shared the wrong one. That's why. I think.
I think you need to be kind of, your desktop needs to be kind of on the PowerPoint presentation window so that it knows what.
Okay. Do you want to?
Oh yes. Use my magic.
Worst comes to worst, we can just not have it on the Zoom.
Oh, get it then. There we go. I don't know what I did. I pressed some buttons until something happened. So I'm a health service researcher. So talking about a lot of chronic health conditions today that I don't know a huge amount because I'm not a clinician. I've got a background in psychology. My kind of specialise in neurodevelopmental disorders and child development. I joined Compass as a senior research fellow for the Life Course project in 2021, which I can't tell if that seems like a long time ago or just yesterday. So we did have, I think I joined in March, and then of course in August we went into lockdown. That meant we couldn't access the data lab for quite a long time, so that has caused some delays. Before I was working at Compass, I was a named investigator for the Growing Up in New Zealand study, so I was focusing on the family and whānau domain there. I spend most of my working week, at least, in the Stats New Zealand data lab in Wellington. So I'm kind of gathering and managing data sourced from their integrated data infrastructure, that IDI. So I'm going to talk today about the first couple of kind of manuscripts to come out of the project, but it'd be good to talk later about how we're going to kind of deal with the amount of data we have for this project and who we should be sharing it with, because I think that's going to be really important. So these are the I'm calling them long-term health conditions rather than chronic conditions. That's just my preference, I guess. I think that's what government tends to use as a kind of umbrella term for these conditions. So these were chosen because they're I think 8 conditions that are included in the Ministry of Health chronic conditions data set within the IDI. And we've added dementia to that, and we've added, it just says mental health conditions, but actually it's a whole set of mental health and behavioural conditions. So we have been looking at all of these, grouping them together, and using kind of a variety of sources for that, for our kind of the criteria for each of these conditions. So how we're working out whether a person has one of these conditions or not within the IDI. So for TBI, we've actually used a very broad criteria based on the ACC definition of TBI, so traumatic brain injury. And for mental health and behavioural conditions, very broad definition encompassing a range of severe and more common mental health conditions and neurodevelopmental conditions. For these chronic conditions, pretty straightforward in terms of going with the Ministry of Health definitions. And then for dementia, we've used criteria that Wales be used in their analysis of IDI data. So I've got the references there, but we don't need to go into too much detail. So I'm going to just mention that the IDI is data that's collected as we go through our lives interacting with government, largely government services. So every time we have an appointment at a hospital or pick up a prescription or visit a social service or visit from a social service, some data is collected and recorded, and that data is anonymised, so nobody can be identified. And it's linkable across different sectors. So when we have, when we qualify when we qualify with a degree, say, or any kind of qualification, that education data is there, and we can link that within the IDI to, say, census responses from 2013 or 2018, or to some health data, maybe we were at a hospital. So you can imagine there's a huge amount of data within the IDI. There are issues with that, which Barry can talk to more about the data, the quality of the data within the IDI and how it's linked, and who's in the IDI and how it's linked. But it does provide us with a very big source of data. So for this presentation, I'm just going to be talking about population data. So data from the censuses from 2013 and 2018 and health data. So, and then for the next part of the project, which I'm just starting work on now, we'll be looking at what happens to people who have a health condition or live in a family where somebody has a health condition, by looking at their education and training outcomes, their income, whether they're receiving any benefits of social services. So these are the kind of my kind of covariates, I guess, and the things that I'm interested in terms of different populations within New Zealand. So fairly straightforward, I think. We are looking at a really broad range of data sources for these health conditions. So I think these are pretty much most of the health data sets that are available within the IDI, and they cover pretty much a broad spectrum of services except for primary care. So that is something that is missing. We can access whether people are registered with a PHO, but not their primary care appointments or what's happening in primary care. One way we can kind of tap into that is through pharmaceutical dispensing, because we know that a large proportion of people with these health conditions will be being managed in primary care, but they might also be receiving medications. That's a really good way to kind of identify them, find these people, is the fact that they're receiving prescriptions. And of course, not all of these are relevant. So particularly pharmaceutical, there aren't any specific medications for traumatic brain injury or stroke. So we can't use those data sets to pick up these in primary care. So there's gaps in some of these kind of services and who's being picked up. But we think we've done our best within the data that's available to find as many people as we can. So just for the first part, this is some work that Andrea Teng has done on really who in Aotearoa has a chronic condition or a long-term health condition, and what kind of levels of comorbidity. So who has more than one health condition, and what's the impairment or kind of the how is that chronic condition impacting on their functioning day to day. And so I'm just going to present some of the work that we've done on this so far. And mainly what I'm wanting to point out is some of the patterns that we see within the data that I've just kind of looked at and found interesting, but also why it's so important that we don't just group everybody together, that we think carefully about different groups of people. So this is, if we look at things very broadly, we've got the estimated resident population of New Zealand as of the 30th of June 2018. Not all of those people are linkable within the IDI, so we have a slightly smaller proportion. And there were various reasons that people couldn't be included in the study, so they might not have any health, or they might not have any linkable health data, or there were some people where it was really hard to work out how old they are, or they appeared to be some issues because they were very young and they had a hospitalization for dementia, and we just thought that didn't quite work out. But we've got a pretty big sample size. So I think this is fairly representative of New Zealand population. It should be. We've used just for this presentation, I've just used level 1 ethnicity. So this is all sourced from within the census, but then we've got other kind of data sets that are kind of more personal details and kind of data sets that StatsNZ have put together that also include ethnicity. So we've gone through all of those, and if anybody was designated within any of those data sets to be European, then they were European. If they were designated or reported or identified as Māori, then they're Māori. So I think we've got slightly higher numbers for Māori in particular than we might see in other data sets, because we've been pretty thorough. And so people can identify with multiple ethnicities, obviously. What's interesting and what we have only really recently looked at is what's the living situation of these people. So the vast majority of people are, not the vast majority, the majority of people are living within a family. Some people are living with other people, but they're not related to them. A similar proportion are living on their own. We've got some people who aren't in a household. And that's actually quite a significant, it says 1%, but it's actually quite a lot of people. So that's where the Stats New Zealand within the census, particularly 2018, couldn't assign a household number for a household identifier for that person. So for some people, that's because they're in prison or they're in another kind of institution. But for some people, it's just a kind of linkage issue where they weren't able to be connected to their household. We've got a significant proportion of missing data. That's really because a number of people who didn't take part in the 2018 census. So we had quite a lot of people who were in New Zealand, resident in New Zealand on the 30th of June 2018, but they didn't complete the census. So we have to kind of take that into account, and it's difficult to know where those people are.
Excuse me, Lisa,
Yeah.
what is NEL?
I should have explained this. So within the Census and Statistics New Zealand classification, we have 6 groups, usually, which is European, Māori, Pacific, Asian, what is that, 5 groups? 4, 5, 6. Mela is Middle Eastern, Latin American, or African. So it's a very heterogeneous group put together, and other is people who don't fit into any of these other categories. I'm not sure who can you give any examples?
Yes, I can. For the most part, getting into the other category means you say something like New Zealander.
Oh, that's true, yes.
It's actually going down the proportion. It was 75% of the last census. Other than that, there's kind of there's little gaps that can put you into that category, such as if you're from the Seychelles. I think Native American. There were about six I would consider real other categories that wouldn't fit anywhere else. But for the most part, it's people who say New Zealanders. And that used to be at the previous census, at 2013, which is what you're using, actually, it's 95, certainly 90+% of people. It's one of the reasons that, and the people who say New Zealander are overwhelmingly white, typically. Not exclusively. And if you look at their pattern of health outcomes, they tend to be very similar to European, although slightly advantaged. It's a category I don't think it's useful to treat as a category, personally myself.
No.
The others make some sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get onto how you split up the MILA, but MILA is also lumping together 3 groups that no one in their right mind would lump together anywhere else in the world, except to put together at a level 1 category. As Len Cook once said to me, former government statistician, level 2 is where the rubber hits the road for ethnicity, not level 1.
Yes.
European isn't really ethnicity. Maori is, Pacific isn't, Asian isn't. But when you get below that, you get to the actual ethnicities like Tokelauan and Tongan and Samoan, or Asian and Chinese. New Zealand European, which I think are distinct from other European in lots of different ways. But so this getting onto a talk about ethnicity. But a lot of people are using the level 1. I'm sensing gladly that it's moving slightly away from this.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've used it here today just because otherwise my graphs look outrageous, and they already do look outrageous, and because we can see already some of the patterns that I'm talking about. Here you can see I have separated out, and I think in the paper that Andrea's writing, we have looked at Chinese and Indian separately, just because they're the only level 2 ethnicity apart from European, New Zealand European, where the kind of proportion of people goes above 5%. But we do have all the data for level 2 ethnicities. That's breaking down European into 2 groups, Pacific into 10. Quite a lot of detail. We have
Hello, hello. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I don't know why we're going to pause. Okay, so now
If you
we
go to, yeah,
and then go to that.
and then let me see if the pointer will move it. I'll try to see if I can move it on this.
Okay, we'll do it. Yep, see if you can.
Oh, yeah, it's working.
What I'm gonna see, however, is if we can share screen. Share screen, which is it's that one. It's this one. Can you go back and put it down? That's what we're struggling with.
It's not working.
Oh, try to.
Yeah, it's
Done?
working.
Okay, well, we won't.
We won't do it again. Okay, all right. I'll just do it then.
Thank you for making it down. Thank you very much for the time. You stick around? It's one of the. You can. Yes, but the connection. Oh, yes. There. So this is the connection here. And so if you do hook up your laptop, it has to be hooked up from sort of this table, because I asked,
okay.
there's no longer connection in this.
I'll just, yeah,
So-
get it there.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. So actually that's a point. Look at,
Otherwise, I've got memory stick if you want to.
yeah, that's or that's the alternative as well.
Oh, you try it.
What we got? So we got second to last. I'll put all of one second last. Andrew.
I thought when I was after morning tea. And I was just gonna say that.
Oh, yeah. I'll put the- how am I getting to go? Yeah. That's. So, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, yeah. I can't wait that someone is here as well. Question.
Let's say that's called. This is the first time
It's down on the outside of the road. On the. No, it's not. The easiest for a Christian. It's along the motorway, if you're going out east. You go under the old. So that's why I was just.
And give me a second, we'll talk about it.
So, Lara has got a, she, Auckland wouldn't promote that. And it's Lara Reeves. And then she. Yeah, she.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
interesting.
And then she went back to Auckland and said, I'd rather not. They would, might counter offer on the money they would see next counter. But then, and she pointed out that she is actually. Oh, she's going to take these. And then she's and she pointed out London, the Asian breeds, but also the figure. She was actually going to be bringing everybody. Just saying that.
Administration.
But really, it was structure. Yes.
Yeah, they struggle
Follow on from there.
connect, engage.
And we're just really something here what they want to do now. What you're saying.
Yes.
So it's just something, no, I don't think. But the more on the case, there's something that goes. So what the see how much the more the rough range for you. Yeah.
Yeah. If I move the laptop, it won't.
Okay. Shall we get underway again? If we play our cards right, we might be able to squeeze 4 talking lists. We'll have Offa followed by Ulrich, followed by Alan Henny, and then who have I got? Andrew. Andrew, how can I forget Andrew?
Disembodied legs.
That's how I've got Andrew. Okay. Offa, and would you like to you can present from there, I think actually.
I'll stand
You wanna stand
here,
there?
yes.
And Offa is
I can see
with
people.
our team at the Compass Centre of Methods and Policy Application of Social Science at the University of Auckland. Also now with the Tongan Health Society,
Yes.
doing some fantastic work with them. And she's going to talk about some fantastic work she's been doing, going out and interviewing Tokelauan families and Tokelauan communities.
Okay, so maloilele, everyone. I want to preface this presentation with a sincere gratitude of the Tokelau community. Each time I meet with them, whether it's individually or with a group or with the leaders, or even informally, I may run into them at the local supermarket. They're always saying, thank you for this research. So those thanks need to be passed on to the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment, the funding they've made available to us through the 3 science challenges here, and to you, Barry, and your leadership through the Compass Centre and the support of the team you give us, and also to the Tongan Health Society, who is a subcontractor on this project. And not forgetting, of course, the Tokelau community, the smallest community, I like to say, in New Zealand, and actually in Oceania, and the fourth smallest in the world. So where is Tokelau? Here it is, approximately 500 kilometers north of Samoa. If you want to go to Tokelau, you need to fly into Apia, then take a boat across to Tokelau, which will take about, well, between 24 to 30 hours to reach the 3 atolls in Tokelau. I didn't realize that my great-grandfather is from Tokelau, came from Tokelau. I only knew my grandfather, mum's dad, from Tuvalu, and which is not too far away from Tokelau. So I can imagine in those days, people would just hop into their water, sail the high seas, meet a wahine in another island, settle there, because my grandfather then somehow sailed the high seas from Tuvalu to Tonga here, met my grandmother, and then mum traveled on to Fiji as a young woman, met my father, who came from Rotuma, about 300 or 500 kilometers north of Fiji, but they met in Suva, settled there, and where I was born and raised, and here I am in Aotearoa, having immigrated from Fiji about nearly 33 years ago, and have lived in the same place in Papatoetoe, South Auckland since then, and within vibrant community, such a diverse community in South Auckland. And I'm delighted to share with you the stories from our Tokelau communities in Auckland and in Wellington. And, you know, I had so much joy engaging with the community leaders and to explain to them about the project and why this is so important for Tokelau as a community to be engaged in scientific research, and why, as a small community, their voices haven't been heard for a long time. I think some of you may be aware of the last major study with the Tokelau communities in Tokelau and in New Zealand was led by the late Dr. Ian Pryor. And that was an amazing piece of work. And Andrew, you told me how that is still upheld as an exemplary piece of work, epidemiological study. And when the Tokelau leaders here, in the top right-hand corner are the 4 leaders from Auckland, and here the 3 community leaders based in Wellington. When they heard about this proposed study, they remembered what Dr. Pryor did for their communities. And so this project will give opportunities for us to compare the 2 studies, what happened some 50 years ago and what we are doing now. And so the aim of the study is clearly set out here. We want to understand from the community themselves and families the impact of these conditions are having on them, but also to work with them and develop sustainable programs that they themselves can implement in their community or in their own homes for overall health and well-being. Right throughout the lifespan, you know, including their children, the young people, adults and older adults. So the methods we applied in this for this project, it's a qualitative study augmented by Talanoa Kōrero, engaging in conversations, listening carefully and trying to understand what people are telling us, and applying Tokelau's own research model and the 6 concepts around family, body, mind, and spirit, how this impacts their own environment and the social supports that they receive. It involved 12 individual or family group interviews. We ended up with 13 because after I completed 12, one family approached me and said, we couldn't join at the time you were recruiting because we had an uncle in hospital, dad suffered a stroke, mum was very ill. And so we children were very busy caring for all three, and they all lived in the same household. And so that's why we couldn't join when you were recruiting. So of course we included them. And we also agreed to conduct 12 workshops, 6 in Wellington, 6 in Auckland. Those workshops have now been completed. Wellington did 6. Auckland community group decided after 3 workshops they'd had enough. They understood, what needed to be done. Let's just get on with it and start our intervention. And so we conducted 3 less than what had been planned. 6 focus groups with key stakeholders also planned. 6 digital stories, again, sharing that time between the 2 research settings, 3 in Auckland, 3 in Wellington. And analysis will take a narrative and thematic approach to understanding the data. And so just picking up on the digital stories where, oh yes, I've mentioned this. The digital stories that we agreed to undertake, we've had our first one during Tokelau Language Week in October, and that was recorded, and we're just tidying up the little video clip of the celebration. And this is the community group in Auckland, and with some invited leaders in the front row. It's the church ministers that are highly respected in the community, and they include them in their functions. And this is the first time in all of the language weeks that we hold in New Zealand throughout the year across the 8 different ethnic groups. This is the first time that a research project is included in the celebration. Usually it's language, promoting the language, dance and performances and lots of speeches. And so we've added to all those activities, talk about research, but it's the community members themselves that are talking about the research, leaders sharing their experiences and just over conversations and sharing the experiences, having their own string band to entertain and dance, do some of their local dances, and just to just see the joy of our community and how this uplifts them. And above it all is how they're connected to the work we're doing, so that and they understand the value they're giving to the research we do. So just looking at some of the themes that have come through from the data we've collected so far. These are the formal supports that the participants clearly identified, key supports that they identified as very important to them. And they included primary health care, having a doctor, and nurses within the clinic that they can engage with, that they can meet with. There's also secondary care. Often they are referred for specialist care, secondary care in the hospitals in either Auckland or Wellington, and the challenges that they face despite everything that's going on around them in their homes and in their families. They see and they welcome this project because of the opportunity to tell their stories and encourage each other not to give up, despite all the challenges they face. Home-based services is also an important one for them. This is where personal care is provided by a formal service, but the limitations of those services were they were either 1 hour a day, or it could be just 2 hours in the week, and they were infrequent. Often the service was not available, and so it then was reliant on the family members to provide that care. And so this was a welcome service, but again, sometimes disruptive or not consistent. So the same, but often there will be different people coming to the home to assist with the care for the family in the home with a chronic condition. Other services included WINS or Oranga Tamariki. We had families. Yes, Lisa described the composition of some of the families in the interviews we conducted with our participants. There were families like it could be a grandparent looking after grandchildren because they didn't want Oranga Tamariki to put them into somebody else's home. And grandparent would be living with a long-term chronic condition. So caring for themselves as well as the grandchildren, as well as coping with part-time work to support the family. Another thing that was noted there was the hidden services that could support some of the families. And this is a quote from one of the participants. There's lots of quotes that will go into the final report and the publications from the research, but I'm going to share just some of them here. And one of them is the hidden services we don't know because of the language barrier. It stops people from finding out more. In terms of the informal support, family carers were highlighted as a very key group to the families. Very difficult experiences. It's like a job in itself. The carers see themselves as the doctor, the nurse, the physio, the cook, the cleaner, the washer, laundry person, everything, even looking after younger siblings or children. But they cope with it, and this is one way a participant shared. We laugh at ourselves because we make up our own staff meeting. We can't see putting our parents in a home, and we joke about it just to have a laugh, but no way. And excuse the typo, I've just noticed it here. But friends played a key role in supporting the families as well as the wider church community. Faith and Christian faith in particular was a priority in all of the families I spoke with in the interviews and even during the workshops. Also for the social groups, they were very, very supportive in terms of older adults having their own social groups, which they organized once a week where they meet, would look forward to catching up with each other. Most of the programs start at 10 o'clock, but they're up at 6 and very early in the morning and ready to go, and just waiting on their children or grandchildren to pick them up and take them to their programs. They make every minute count. I've attended some of those community groups and they have so much fun. And when they leave, they can't wait for the following week. Some of them are smart. They check out other old people's groups in the community, whether it's Tongan or Fijian or Samoan, Cook Island, and they go to it. And this one I refer to only as the Tokelauan community group, and 2 groups in Wellington and in Auckland. And of course, there are other social groups mentioned there. And the social media platforms, I'm sorry, that's dropped off the screen over there, but that's another informal support that the families draw on through their social media platforms, but also for Pacific, the Coconut Wireless. It's free also. Anyone can join, and you're welcome to if you want to connect, but you build the relationship with them, and then connect with the community that way. During COVID-19, we conducted our interviews, and so there were additional challenges that the participants identified due to the pandemic. It also affected our work, but we chose to wait until restrictions were lifted and we can meet face-to-face again with the participants. So all the interviews and engagements with the community were face-to-face. And only when it was agreed to by the community and the research team. And, in addition to all the audio recorder, paperwork, consent forms, I added sanitizers, masks, and when the rats became available, take them along as well. And so they were grateful to have that added protection. They understood why that was important for them. And through the Tongan Health Society, we conducted drive-through vaccination events in the community at different churches around Auckland, and encouraged the communities, and all of the communities actually, anyone who wanted to receive the vaccine, to come to our events. And by the way, this Saturday will be our last drive-through for the year. Yes, last chance for the year to come to the Tongan Health Society's drive-through event, and it will have a Christmas theme, and just to celebrate with people at this time of the year, but also the difficulties that they've managed to cope with and continue with their lives throughout a very difficult time. And I just want to share with you, this is, a whole page of a quote from one of the participants. And she's telling us here how much this means to her and her family, but it also reflects what the wider community has been saying about the research, why they want people to see their experiences from a different point of view, what is needed and what is necessary to be done, and to care for our elderly, because with the families, the caring was mostly for their older aunts, uncles, grandparents, and even great-grandparents. There's some instances of caring for the children. There was one family, an aunt with husband, children, but also caring for nephew who had a congenital heart disease. And she had been caring for nephew since he was 6 months old, now a teenager, struggling to get him into school. And she talked about how the system has been very difficult for her. And so that's one situation versus others where family members dealing with older adults with stroke. You have couples, the wife having to quit work because the husband has had a stroke. She's the husband's wheelchair, walking frame, because hospital hasn't yet delivered the equipment that they needed. And so, rather than wait, they just get on with what needs to be done with minimal support and help. So she emphasizes in here too, where you think that WINZ would be the first place to go for help, and they do go, but often turned away. And so it's just coping with whatever they can do and looking to family and the extended family and wider church community to provide the support they need. So in terms of the preliminary results, there are a range of lived experiences within families, significant lifestyle changes to their homes, the Christian faith played a key role in coping, but also the sense of humor and the culture and the language, and having that time and opportunity to be able to share and spend time with the wider community and support each other. In terms of the formal support, that was mixed. Those in the know would benefit the most, but mostly it was unaware of what was available, or because of the language barrier, it was very difficult for them to then ask for help or even make inquiries. And I found with the Tokelau community, they're very shy, the very people of, well, they don't say too much, they'll just keep it to themselves, very private, and that's how they always are. But this is, this project has given the opportunity. It's okay, let's talk and let's have fun. If we can share our stories, we will be able to address the issues that they're currently facing. And yeah, I want to highlight again what the participants themselves have said, how caring for family at home was important, and that the informal support played a key role. I've mentioned also the challenges with COVID-19, and how people are working to address with whatever resources they have, address their needs, but this is one way where we can make a bigger difference for them. So in terms of implications, the research has implications for practice and policy in a range of services, not only for government, central government, but also in local government, because they too have a role to play. I mean, people, it's always heard, people are our most valuable asset, and if so, then let's afford them the value that they deserve. And for Tokelau families and communities, the research also has very strong implications for their inclusion and involvement in developing the policies and programs that will impact their own health and well-being, not only for the children and young people, adults, but also for the older adults. So next steps to June, and we need to complete our community intervention and evaluate it. The two programs, both in Auckland and Wellington. Our focus group interviews with key stakeholders, and the 5 more digital stories that we want to complete. And as well, the final data analysis of what we've been able to bring together and to disseminate the study findings. But key to this will be talking to the right people who will do the right thing about it. And, there are lots of people who are interested, but in the time we have to make an impact with our work, it's important, that's key to it. Included in some of our participants are people who were medically evacuated from Tokelau for treatment. And as you know, Tokelau is a round country of New Zealand. They are New Zealand citizens, and they too have challenges with the medical system in Tokelau, and it's no different to what they have experienced here with the medical system, particularly in Wellington. Most of the medical evacuees went to Wellington, and I didn't meet any in the Auckland community. So Wellington had a mix of both residents here, people who were evacuated, and if it was the husband who was requiring the treatment in New Zealand, the spouse would have to quit her job. We had teachers who had to quit work at school to be able to accompany husband here. And then, of course, during COVID, that had its own challenges. Appointments were delayed. They were stuck in Wellington, no immediate family. And so whoever they can get support with, they were the ones that were caring for them. And so the community is keen to see how not only can this research help to make an impact and improve services in New Zealand, but also in Tokelau. And this is where the data will be very important and how it might improve the, what do you call it, Andrew? Is it linking the NHI with
The portable
Yes.
National Health Index number. Yeah.
that's it, with Tokelau? And could be an example for doing similar for the other realm countries in Niue and the Cook Islands. So, and yes, a special request from the community. They would love to take the findings to Tokelau itself and share it with the government, the leaders there, and with the community. And if that can be part of the research, then they would like to see it. But it's, you know, working together, both with in Tokelau and here in New Zealand to make it work and put the findings to work. So here's some references I've used in the study, and finally here is our study protocol, which we published early in the year. More details about the study is included there. And so, you know, this project draws from the previous work supported by Aging Well, we work with our family carers at end of life. Younger family carers was the follow-up study, and also the previous work that Dr. Ian Pryor conducted. And lastly, it's big thank you to everyone, and this is the community group and leaders in Wellington. This is following the first workshop, which was after church on a Sunday. So I flew into Auckland, go to church, listen to the beautiful singing, and the message, the sermon was all in Tokelau. So, I just pretended I understand, but it was just so beautiful, and they have angelic voices. I thought Samoans sing beautifully. They sing just as beautifully, yeah. And so thank you very much to the funders, challenge directors, Compass. Thank you, Barry and team. Andrew, you've been a great support for us in making sure our project was responsive to Māori, and how our learnings can, help to contribute if there's anything there that will be helpful, and to the Tongan Health Society. And now we're engaging with their newest addition, the Langimalia Research Centre. So that's it, Malo Apito, thank you.
Thank you, Opa. Any questions for Opa?
In terms of taking it back to the Tokelau, are you able to raid the Health Research Council Pacific Fund? Do they have dissemination grants that could help support that?
They have knowledge transfer grant, $5,000.
Oh, okay.
And maybe if you and Barry and I applied, that's 15. But no, it's limited to 5,000. Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade is an opportunity. National Science Challenges, possibility.
In terms of wash-up funding, in terms of if it's going to make a difference, then because lots of challenges are sitting on rats and mice, small amounts of money to understand that might be useful. The other thing is the Ministry of Pacific Peoples, their long-term investment briefing is on data.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think there's a really good link in with what you've just described here, with where they're heading, and you, in fact, you're ahead of them, right? So I think a timely link up with them and with their long-term investment briefing, I think that's just about finished.
Mhm,
that process. But you're actually a living example of it.
mhm.
So that would be good to just knock on the doors and reintroduce projects and say, look,
Yes,
understand you've got the briefing, what opportunities are there to use this as an exemplar and promote it as an exemplar. Yeah, because
yeah.
you're doing what they are hoping to do,
Mhm.
right?
Okay,
Already.
yeah. And we have good connections with the minister and Barry, you're working with the director at MPP, Anna, Dr. Anna Koloko, yeah. So those are the, I think we take a targeted approach to these key stakeholders to take the next step. With that, yes. So. Janine, and I think Hamish?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
So I'm just wondering, Opera, if you think the issues that were raised by the Tokelau community is similar to what you find in other small ethnic groups, or are there things that are specific to the Tokelau community that should be translated? I'm just wondering how this generalizes to other small ethnic groups.
Very much. The experiences are similar, and they came through in the family carers study, caring for older adults at end of life. That came through very clearly, again with the younger carers and how that impacted their education, how it impacted others who had to quit work to look after parents or grandparents. I mean, there was one of the younger family carers who would set up dialysis for grandfather before school. And then the family would find out that the son was excluded from sporting activities or other extracurricular activities. And when they looked into it, it was because, oh, your son is frequently late on these days, but they never sought to ask for why they didn't understand. He was setting up the dialysis and making sure grandfather was set up, and then he'd go to school, and during the day mother would take over that responsibility. Yes, so Janine, there are similarities that can be experienced by other communities. The medical evacuation scheme was the difference brought up in this study, but I know that for countries like Tonga, Samoa, the families would bring them over if they could manage it, even with Fiji. But when we think about the people with diabetes, for instance, and also needing dialysis, not all of those countries have the facilities.
When we've looked at, I haven't presented it today, so we've been looking often at census data and young people who provide care to someone in their household or someone outside their household. Among Pacific ethnicities, Tokelau has much higher number of young people providing care than the other ethnicities, and we see quite a lot
They
of
have the
variation.
highest.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So we've seen quite a lot of variation among Pacific ethnicities in that young caring, and I'm going to be looking at what the outcomes are for those young carers. So it'll be interesting to see if there's differences in their education and employment outcomes.
And and the situation they're in can just happen overnight.
Yeah.
Suddenly, I mean, unaware that they are living with diabetes until they're diagnosed, or become a family carer, and all of a sudden someone in the family needs to be cared for, and then you're having to deal with work situation in school, and it's and it's the I've mentioned, I think once before, of the son who at high school, the father had a stroke, paralyzed, and so he quit school immediately because he was, he had to carry his father, waited so long for a wheelchair, and until father died, they still didn't receive any help.
Yeah, and thank you for showing that work, and particularly the focus group work about how much there is on the families to care and no resources. And that's sort of what Control Data shows as well. There's a lot, very, very big equity difference between Europeans who go to rest homes and get the resources to look after older people, and Maori and Pacific and witness variation who don't do that as much. So we're trying to put that together in another project and present that to government, but your research there will be really useful. And there are focus groups and that how families feel and things.
Yeah. And some of the things that have happened since the previous project on family caring, the Tongan Health Society took on board the findings and did a 6 months pilot project to see how the service could add a program for looking after family carers. And following that pilot, it was so successful, they received funding from the Ministry of Health to extend the program. They've set up a network. And so it's just, you know, starting out with what they can do within the community, ethnic specific, because they already have the resources to start the program. So it's just a matter of them, you know, building up that work. Yeah.
So what about Hamish, that raises, what is the better outcome in terms of the quality of the life person being cared for? It could be a small child, 15-year-old looking after a 4-year-old. And rest homes are not the ideal always. And your area slide about preference for being cared for at home. So it does seem to me that that's really resources thing to go.
Yes.
Maintaining that, cultural approach.
But what I also found out in Wellington with one of the Presbyterian support services, they have residences but are now vacant, and they can't, well, they don't have enough clients to occupy those homes. And so yeah, I want to find out more. How is it if they do have houses that are not occupied and they're unable to occupy them? Here's a community with a medical evacuation scheme. They you know, they've been talking about how they can raise funds to build houses for the families that come over from Tokelau. But if we already have that facility that is empty, you know, and that's what I want to follow up and explore that further to see.
So they won't want to tell their shareholders.
Oh, is that what it is?
So, you know.
Okay.
Keep that under the, while they're marketing, busy marketing and developments.
Okay. So that's what we're up against, you know, lack of home.
It's a commercial.
Yes.
And up against a commercial.
For profit.
It is similar, you know, and familiar to things Taha Māori or Te Ao Māori, and what the voice of the community are saying. And it is just taking a deep breath, I do anyway, because I think that, you know, we as the community understand the needs, and it's kind of like, hello, Ministry of Health or Social Development, we know what we need to do for our whānau, enable us to do that. And it's a real shame through, well, good thing through COVID is that we were able to resource communities outreach, because then they saw trusted faces and spaces was the going model, and it was like, we told you to do this right from the start and no one listened. And we had our own experience through Kaumātua group out rural Canterbury here, and we were gatekept from our own body organisations because they were trying to tick boxes and red tape. So it's quite frustrating to continually say, we've been doing it, we do it well. What we know are the gaps is around workforce development and helping whānau being the best carers that they can be, and the supports around that. And so after the COVID services, you know, you're saying this is going to be their last roadie or their last Christmas celebration. And even that in itself in the pilot, I've seen how our own communities cared for their whānau groups, how that's had a huge impact on their well-being. But COVID's finished, really. And so there goes the funding to be able to enable all of those workers, volunteers, and they're calling them at the Equity Kui,
kai manaaki. And it's like, well, who's manakiing the kai mahi?
Yes.
Because now there's no manaki anywhere. And so, you know, I think our community really gets frustrated when things are working well for them. And then, boom, that was a pilot, see you later. We were on a plane somewhere else. And it's like, well, yeah, so I just wanted to add that the same frustrations are seen across all Indigenous peoples, where it's like, just hand over the bloody dollar. Because that's basically what it's holding us back. Give us the capacity to deliver.
Absolutely. And this is where the next step is going to be key to what the community wants to do, and continue that momentum. The connection is very important, and the relationships, we built strong relationships. This is a community that I had very little to no contact at all. And then to find out that I'm connected, through bloodline, yes, but it's not just Tokelau, it's every other community group. And so many good things have come out of the study. So they are very, very grateful indeed. So, yes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That's what we made the claim, actually, didn't we? When we put together the proposal that focusing on one community, we come up with a template that could be applied elsewhere. It seems like this might be the case. So, right. Ulrich now presents some work.
Back to the ground.
Back to the ground. That he and Lucas already.
Photos in mine.
Very close.
Didn't
This
do
one?
my.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see if I can get this working now.
Yes.
Which one is the wonderful magic thing? It's
This thing, yep, so you can,
I had fun doing it.
what I will do is I'll put it on share screen. Share screen, and it is. Oh God, how this works. This one, slideshow, share, okay. So. Not that one. Sorry. Is it this one?
that one.
PowerPoint stuff, that's this
Because
one.
that's the presenter view.
No, that's what I.
Yeah, it's there. It's there. Wonderful. It's all there. Very-
And is all there? Okay,
I hope-
so can
otherwise-
you try to go forward and back? That's the question. That's what I was afraid. Oh, you're going forward back here, but not there.
Oh, how did I do that before?
That's what I was.
Shall I come and just press button?
Yeah,
Normally my experience is whenever I go near a computer, it
okay.
does bad.
There we go. That's the bit I wanted.
Perfect. Thank you. Data scientist is called. So I'm tagging on to the work that Lisa has done, but before we go into it, I want to acknowledge a number of people. Barry, first of all, you for all the mahi and setting up the study for the three science challenges, for actually providing the resources to do that. Also, it came to me, there are in the study 5 million people who've given their data in a way allowing us to do this research. So I don't want this to be forgotten. And more specifically, Lisa, I want to acknowledge you for the work that you've been doing, allowing Lucas to tag on and build upon all of your queries and all the things you've done to tie the things in the IDI together. Lucas Marek from the UC has been the key person doing all the math and programming and stats. Hamish, myself, Uri Hapati, and to some degree, John Pickering and Simon Kingham have been alongside it, trying to inform and trying to work out how do we do this whole thing. So I don't want this to be forgotten. And I will present some data, and at some point, Uri Hapati, I will ask you to just to put your lens on it. And what I originally planned to cover, and I will try to shorten this, is just give a brief about the background context, what we're aiming for, what's the cohort what are the disease pattern we're looking at, and this may be the area of focus on, simply because it hasn't been covered yet. And then a brief update on the aim of chronic conditions and so forth. So the aim was, we wanted to see the impact of chronic conditions on the wider family and whānau. Emphasis on lifelong consequences. I will cover later what challenges that provides specifically for the elder cohort. And those are the 4 areas that we wanted to work. We have framed as the aim. Method-wise, summary, we're doing the analysis of continuously recruited cohort of older adults, which is the IDI. IDI probability matches, doesn't do NHI matching, it goes by birth date, by gender, and does the third one, which is, I think, a 98% probability of being the right person connected. But there is it's probability matched. We did descriptive analysis for aims 1 and 2, and then just regression based for number 3. First point to highlight is we made a conscious decision to include Maori and Pacific people from an age 55 years on, and all the others at 65. We did this because we wanted to capture and include this known discrepancy in aging. However, it also causes some problems in terms of the analysis, that decision. At the end, we identified nearly 670,000 people, older people in the IDI, in that inclusion area. We excluded 277,000, which were not living in a family situation, which left us with 391,000 of the few to work with. So the cohort, first thing to notice is all of the age brackets are skewed towards the younger age, which is clear because the mortality prunes it off over time. And then it's the first issue we're having based on our age selection. We see for Maori and Pacific a female dominance in the cohort, but once we hit 65, it becomes a male dominance focus. We do not know whether this is due to differences in Maori and Pacifica or whether we see the same in Europeans. So it's a result of our data selection, and it would be worth going back and redoing it, but there's a lot of effort involved getting through the IDI. The other thing we see is that the older the cohort gets, the more males are in there, trend-wise. If we look at just breakdown by ethnicity, again, Maori and Pacific, you see the age earlier, and probably if I would do the study again, I wouldn't do this data selection. Some of the learnings, I would go with the same cohort so we can make informed decisions about what is actually happening in this 10-year age bracket. If we look at the family settings, I'm just going really focused because of time on some of the key findings. What we're seeing is Maori and Pacific peoples, you see more families with more family members. So the European families tend to be 2-3 members. Maori and Pacific people have a far greater proportion of bigger families. Again, it's another issue we're facing when we're looking at impact on others. So this is visually by age, sex, and prioritized ethnicity. You see, first of all, the gap, which is the missing 55 to 65, which is there. And you see the male, more male dominated versus female, which is then changing from around that 70-year-old bracket. Whether this is mortality or drives it, I don't know. but there is a change going on. We see the same, but to a lesser degree in Pacific people. They stay female, more female dominant. And I'm not, because of the cohort size, I'm a bit reluctant in interpreting them. But what you said earlier, Barry, makes perfect sense from our data. These others are very, very similar to European, but wealthier. Which you can see here. Now, deprivation by, and this is in this age group. This is not the whole cohort, this is just this age group. We clearly see the difference here. Miloš is a different pattern. Others is pretty similar to European, but more in the first two quintiles. And if you go do that visually, it's even more noticeable. That graph doesn't show whether this has an impact on the percentage of people with chronic conditions due to the deprivation. But it's absolutely visibly the socioeconomics are very, very clearly visible. And then there's another thing we wanted to put in. We looked into who's accessing, who's getting into right assessments. Those are assessments for people who are seeking publicly supported support services, home service, age residential care. And clearly visible is that Maori, Pacific, and Asians don't reach for, my interpretation, I will ask you to interpret it, we don't see the number of assessments being conducted percentage-wise for Maori, Pacific, and Asians. It's also high for other, but this may be a reflection of the difference in wealth.
I think that what
Over to you.
we've talked about is, we know through Interai, and my experience has been the co-master planning process of the CDHB for the last 9 years. Access is the reason why, as well as the referral process to special services. So, like you're saying, you know, in Pacific Island, Whānau, we go to WINS, wrong place. We should be going to NAS. We should be going to Officers Health and getting carer support funding and work through a process of government-funded resources to help our communities. But you know, our communities don't know that service even exists. And why is because we've got one Māori registered nurse doing the job for the whole of the South Island, or you know, the Waitaha region. So that's what we understand, and from a Māori perspective, and I believe it's from a Whānau perspective as well, because we're not seeing trusted places and places and spaces for our whānau to engage. And that's why I love the startup, because it's like, you know, we've got an answer for that. Let us deliver it.
And so when Pacific families access primary healthcare service, they're only in that consultation, it's only for the purpose of that visit and not looking into, well, what else is needed and what can also, because if that's the first point of call for them, they should be able to get other information about where else. But immediately, often they just think finance, you know, we can get funding and then we can buy what we need for the family we're caring for. So this is where Common Health picked up on that and set up their service to connect with the NASA and where housing was required, connect them with the Kainoura or WINS as necessary. And
The reason I'm popping in and out, I'm going through exactly that process at the moment, because my 19-year-old parents, you know, we've got 3 nurses in our family, right? And I'm not a nurse, but I've got some degrees that are hopefully worth something. And we are having huge problems navigating.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just layer on layer on layer of network
piece, but if you have to change address, or if somebody takes the person away to care for them for a little while, because that, then the system breaks down. But yeah, this is really going to be really useful. Thank you.
And there's an interesting dimension on that. In my own experience, my dad who lived to nearly 100, and my aunt who lived to maybe 106. I ended up, after my dad died, I was managing 11 relationships on his behalf. And they kept accumulating, so as if there was a dependency increase, although he was proud himself. He used to say to people that he lived independently, and I was saying, so it's not just a one-off, it accumulates over the community time. Until it gets to the point where it's just about calorie.
One other thing that's visible in here, if you look at the bluish bar, these are the assessments conducted when someone is in residential care regularly. So Europeans 8.2 versus 2.5, clear indication of how, this is my interpretation from the outside. One is the strength of the whānau support that may culturally make that more fitting to be at home, but there's also a difference in accessing and providing.
Yeah, look, that last call I had was make sure he gets assessment while he's in the hospital, because he ain't getting it otherwise.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Demand it, don't leave.
yeah, do not leave until you actually get it.
The other one to that I'll refer is that we usually die within 11 weeks scenario of ARC placement, because
You're
we're
getting
so
late.
chronic that we get there for the last weeks, days. So we don't actually live out our 70-day average of ARC placement. So 72 weeks, sorry, 72 weeks average.
It would be something for us to look at, Hamish, in the infrared data to see the time to death.
And that's anecdotal because it's my own experience of placement. And there is great examples of when we have navigated whānau, but that's a lot of hand holding and navigating relationships to even get to that. But they do live longer too. So, you know, but usually we haven't been assessed and we're too late.
Okay. That is effectively, okay, I didn't finish a sentence here. That's effective summary. The next part I wanted to cover is just looking at chronic conditions, and I have it in a later slide. But one of the challenges in this older cohort is people, Hamish used to say, we collect chronic conditions as we age. So it's no longer one condition, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's not just me, it's my partner as well. So we get a whole mix of chronic conditions within our cohort where it becomes quite tricky to untangle what is cause, what's effect, how do they mix together. So we spent a significant amount of time actually in this project to get a handle on what's the picture of chronic conditions in this cohort. So, and this dives deeper by slide. So what we have is this number, and this should be the same, but there's some minor changes due to whatever. So we see number of comorbidity or long-term conditions over ethnicities. Again, percentage of females in the cohort. So the first thing you can see is that with age increasing, more and more men are in the cohort and the number of conditions increase, which is very different to what you, Hamish, you said you're observing in your clinical practice. And we're checking on whether we have a coding issue in our program, whether we have a reverse coding. So far, we didn't find one, but we're looking into whether this is truly the case. The other thing you can see is that the number of Maori and Pacific and Asians without comorbidity is actually rather high. My guess is it's an access issue and being diagnosed rather than reality. And And then the other numbers are, there's not really something that stands out to me in terms of percentage, but that's the picture.
Just on that, I think it's access at 2 levels, access to get into the environment where an assessment can be done to find those other chronic conditions. Also, there's that lovely saying, if you don't want to find a fever, don't take a temperature.
Yep.
Right. And so one of the things that we're finding is that they're interested in treating that particular issue, right? Rather than looking at all the at the wider group, because if they look at the wider group,
It's overwhelming.
yeah, but also that beds, they're there for a long time, right?
Mm.
So it's a let's deal with the immediate issue, but turn it out, right? And without, so they're not actually actively pursuing those, looking at those comorbidities.
Mm. Okay.
And would that be the same, Hamish, in the data of who gets CTs or who gets the thorough check and the MRIs? And, you know, I hear all the time, one person tells me their pathway to a child having epileptic fit, and then seeing the pathway of my whānau member who's done that, and you know, it's like, oh, you actually you went through the whole gamut, you know, and we got send you home and you're feeling okay, and these are some things you watch out for, you know, so
It's the older population, right? And I think the older people often don't want to know the other conditions, right? I see this with my parents, you know, parents who, you know, they just want to be in and out of there. So if there's if there's something else that they should get tested
Too much.
next year with that.
You mean the denial part?
Just don't trust
Possibly.
them.
So then we looked at the chronic conditions in terms of how many instances we have reported. This is why I asked the question to you before, because people have multiple conditions. These numbers up to here, up to there, are instances of reports. They're not people. So we've seen 18,687 instances of AMI being reported in a data set. And 9,500 of them are, 28,000 male, female proportion of them. So if we then look into the distribution by sex, some of those conditions have more males, others more females. Where more females have that reported, which you may clinically have a reason for that, or we're just seeing it. Then what I've done is I said, now let's look at the people who have at least one chronic condition, which is those 289,000. 51.7 of them have a mental health flag, plus others. We come to that, but they have that one. That's why this number adds to 266%, because or 224, because on average, people have 2.24 chronic conditions in our cohort. If I then look at the cohort in total, which includes all the ones who do not have a chronic condition, means 38% of women in this cohort have a mental health related flag in our data set. So it's just an attempt to estimate the prevalence amongst the population, which would mean if that is true, and we need to check whether
it will be because at that age, they're being prescribed so many different things.
and if we use the medication as an indicator for mental health, that would explain that number.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's
So they're receiving something for sleep or an antidepressant for
something,
yes, chronic pain.
and they pop up in it. I mean, that would make perfect sense.
Yeah. So it's whether you consider that receiving that medication is a significant kind of thing, an event,
On
an
its own.
indication of. I mean, we were quite pretty strict. They had to have received, or they had to have had two dispensings within 12 months. So it's not just one sleeping tablet, not just one one
But a continuous
antidepressant.
supply of it.
It's over time.
Mhm.
But even so, I mean, I think just it delves into the whole polypharmacy among older adults, and we know there's inequity in that. And I mean, maybe it happens less at home than it. Well, I don't know if it happens less at home than it does in care homes.
So one of the things I took out of today already is we may need to rerun this analysis in order to align this number with your work in the same criteria. Because
Maybe.
quite likely that even if Lucas used all of your scripts, that part is different. So then we go further. If I then look at these conditions in terms of difference by sex across different ethnicities, it also gets an interesting picture because some of them are like AMI cancer, coronary heart disease.
Yes, you're right.
They're all more males in this. If you look at mental health, it's all females. Some of them are mixed. Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's the more plenty of space to interpret that, but it's quite. But it's interesting how varied that is by ethnicity. So the next step we took is saying, now let's look at two conditions. What if we take one and another condition together? How often do they coincide? So, and the green part is, again, the cohort, if you have at least one condition, like if you have COPD, 28% of the ones who have COPD have also AMI. Which again, the mental health part goes through and so forth. And the lower one is if you look at the whole cohort, this includes the people who do not have a condition at all. So it's a slightly different picture.
Which way do we?
So
If you have dementia, how
if you have dementia,
many people have a mental health problem in addition to dementia? Because that's one that we found a real big crossover.
Was that 25.75?
13.5.
That's
Others,
diabetes.
25.7.
So
So
it's about AMI and cancer, then.
Yeah, which is 96%.
Oh, AMI and CHD. AMI is a subset of CHD, so it makes it difficult if you look at them separate.
Yeah, they are. It's slightly different to yours. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and the coronary heart disease.
They won't quite be all because in one data set you
you
can
see
have
it,
either
okay.
CHD or AMI. So they won't.
You see it in this number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I keep going because we're not done with, if you can see in the initial analysis, we have many people with more than 2 chronic conditions. So we thought, how can we shed light on this? And this is a graph called Sankey, and the way it works is you take the first condition and look what coincides, then take the second and then use the rest of the cohort, break it down, but it becomes very quickly unreadable. It's a nice wallpaper, but it's hard to interpret. You get very quickly lost in it, at least I do. So what Marek has done, he looked at a novel way and actually invented what I baptized as Marek's moon plots.
That's fantastic.
And this is a completely new way of showing clusters. And the way it works is you have color codes and you have a frequency in terms of dot size. And then it goes into a plot where you have the primary first condition in the header with a number of instances. Then the second condition shows in the diagonal. So coronary heart disease and diabetes gives you that plot, that frequency. Then the third condition, Coronary heart disease, diabetes, that's why this part is green, gives you mental health. And then the other conditions are shown around as moons. That's where the name comes from, moons. And it took me quite a while to get the hang of it. That's why I run you through it. And I want to ask you to spend time analyzing them. But I just found them worth acknowledging the creative work that Marek has done here. So if we go for AMI, this relationship AMI with a low number and coronary heart disease is clearly visible, and you see a number of other clusters coming in. If you go for cancer, it gets more complex. Cancer, diabetes, and cancer, diabetes plus mental health or gout, or cancer, mental health, and stroke. So you get all these different clusters, and you can spend hours trying to dissect it. And the more diseases you have got covered, the smaller the plot gets. So at the end, you have effectively stroke and TBI left. And one of the questions I have as a researcher here, what would happen if we don't start the analysis with AMI, but with cancer, for example, or with a clinically sensible hierarchy of elimination? And it would be a step that would need discovery and discussions and other information. But it could possibly provide a very sensible way of showing clusters of chronic conditions in this age group.
Because AMI is a very low proportion. It's the smallest prevalence. You could do it by impairment.
Yeah,
but
I
we've got that
I
done.
don't have the background to do that, nor does Lucas, so we just pick that sequence. So, summary: number of comorbidities increase with age. They're progressively more prevalent in men with age, whichever way you articulate this. I switch over that because we need to check the other source. And we need to do more work on the clusters. So this covers the two pieces we pretty much completed at the moment, except we may need to rerun some of the analysis. So now comes the next one, the impact of chronic conditions. We have some issues with that specific to our cohort. As I said, older adults just have chronic conditions, which makes the whole causal effect thing a bit tricky. Each occupant in a dwelling of older people is likely to have their own chronic condition, so you get another thing. Only Maori and Pacific people tend to have larger families in a dwelling. So which means the representation of what a family is different in our analysis between Europeans and Maori and Pacific people. So we can't compare. Someone asked me before what I would like to see in the IDI. One of the things that would have helped us is to actually have a family tree in the IDI that we can say, actually, my son lives in Wellington, my daughter in Dunedin at the moment. Therefore, the impact of my whatever chronic condition I have on them can be traced. At the moment we can't, because we can only see who is in a dwelling on census day. So if my son would have been, for example, with us on census day, we would be a family of 3 for the analysis. So and the last one is, we found very few viable outcome data for this cohort, because people don't earn anymore. They're on either super or benefits or some other predefined income. So the ones we picked, we thought may give us something, is overseas travel, which you can see in the IDI. So if you inhibited in your movements for whatever reason, you won't travel as much. So that we can see. We could see family income, benefits, hospitalizations, address changes. So that the 5 we picked as outcomes. And we've developed 19 models to show differences and similarities across ethnicities and across conditions and all sorts of things. And Lucas has just a few days ago finished the analysis, prepared it for the data checking vetting process to go through Stats New Zealand. So we haven't seen the numbers yet. That's where we are with this one. So just strength, a huge data set. I think it has high epidemiological value. We can see details. The limitations, we have no information about time of or detail of diagnosis. So cancer, for example, we don't know what cancer it is. We don't know, did it happen in 2012 or in 1990, and so forth. We have no data to analyze, to form and analyze family networks. We don't see them. And the one that also got us, especially if we're looking at just publishing the information about that cohort, we only looked at people who are in a family setting, which means we can't generalize that to the New Zealand older people population and show chronic conditions and prevalence and mixtures. So, we're from here, we are waiting the data. We're creating manuscripts at the moment, and if we have time and space in our resources and funding, we would love to redo the analysis, putting all the people in, because we think in it on its own has value. But that is to be seen whether we can do that. And then acknowledgements and questions. Over to you. Any comments?
What it does highlight is the lack of clinical access to some clinical pathway data. You know, you've just got sort of going in the door, out the door, various care settings, and actually what happens in the middle, the important bit, we're actually blind to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I provided very blunt data, but there is more detailed data about when people were picked up. So it would be any time between 2008 and 2018, and everything that happened to them in between those dates.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the clinical pathway within
Yes.
the hospital that we're relatively
Right,
blind
yes.
to, right?
Yes,
And-
oh,
and-
absolutely.
Yeah, and so the Whakaora Orders just released registration of interest about rebuilding the data system. And I think this is one of the things we need to start looking at, is that we are currently, we're looking at outputs, right? Which is basic, we're actually looking at endpoints that were measured by financial transactions, to be blunt, right? Apart from debt. Because it's a costing model that produces data that we end up playing with, that ends up going into the IDI. I think one of the next things is to do is actually say, well, yeah, that's okay, but we need to actually have a better picture of what's happening in the outpatients and inpatients area, and being able to link that up, especially with our older population.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an opportunity here to, yeah.
We just completed a different study on deprescribing, and one of the things we were challenged with is that while we can see the inter-eye data that we used as an entry point to the intervention, we had very limited access to actually the medical records. And then if we look at Canterbury, CDHB has a very good data warehouse and they could see what they have done. But if it comes to GP transactions, we need to go to the primary healthcare provider to get that data set, which then cuts it down to 80% of our cohort, to then go to the specialists to see, okay, who had done. So it becomes a very near impossible exercise to actually create a health journey for an individual.
Yeah, and if we're doing that study by study, it's just going to take up a whole lot of resources. But Waimata DHB, when we're DHBs, we're building that model. And I think there's an opportunity here to actually, even if we're not involved with the development of that data system, is to just really strongly advocate. If we want to know where the inequity is, if we want to know where the burden is, if we want to know where we need to put resources, we need to be able to look at processes, not just outputs of those processes. And they are getting data there, but as you say, the data is scattered.
And it's possibly in a structure that is very tricky to analyze
Yeah, so if we do that system wide, rather than,
on local level, when it's one of the huge opportunities with the reform.
yeah, yes, so they've actually.
I was disagreeing with the reform with the new changes to that, the requirements for Māori Health Authority.
Yeah, and if you look at the board of Whaiora, there's actually 4 Māori data nerds, health data nerds on that board, right? And they're really strong pushing for this, so I think we've got an opportunity to actually do something very awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this, that could be one of the really successful outcomes of this project, as you say, this is actually what we need, right? And that will go into the design of something that. Enduring.
Oh, it's just a reflection, I mean, without all of the data analyses, what came up in the slide, I think it's that the impact on families amongst Maori and would be much greater than any other stay living together in family groups, so.
That one.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a clear indication of that very first descriptive slide, that the European or if families are living apart, what we do for our families is buying services, but of course, being married, it's clearly very different. So even without doing analysis, the effect is going to be larger or very different.
Likely to be larger.
Yeah.
But
and
even,
much more.
but
So
even,
between, that depends on what outcome you look at, doesn't it? Because you've got more people to spread the load among yourself. So I don't know.
but
Yeah,
even,
because
even
the people, chances are they're younger, like really young.
Yeah,
So it's spreading it, spreading the load on people who shouldn't have the load.
yeah,
You've got people dropping out of school to
yeah,
because your father is paralyzed, and that's
yeah,
that wouldn't happen now.
yeah.
but it,
That's what I'll be looking at in mine, is what happens to young people. Over time.
Is it all bad though, like intergenerational, when I spend a lot of time with my grandparents, we learn a lot about
Exactly.
humanistic and things like that. I think there may be some benefits from having older people who are part of the now.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's like all bad, it's going to be effect, it's going to be more immediate and present in their lives. Than if you're not living together in the same house.
And have some resources.
this is what something we talked about in a different study, is that it may mean that for Maori and Pacific people, the funding doesn't need to go or shouldn't need to go into aged residential care, but actually into the community. And different models for.
And interesting enough, though, I've been going lately asking the Indigenous questions, and there was a Chinese man, and he was saying, their care burden and stress is like something, because of our jobs we were talking about, he hasn't actually even come to fathom what looking after his parents are going to be, because they're still in China, but in the China law, there's only one child. So you've got his wife, who's the only child, and himself, and they've got 4 people who aren't even in the same building as them. They can't get them transferred. They actually don't want to live in New Zealand. They want to stay in their own country. But how are they going to set up to look after or prepare to look after the elderly if they get older? So it's quite eye-opening for him to actually say, and so from an Indigenous cultural perspective, we've all got kind of urgencies and arc, and for people who want to have that choice to I think it's a hugest problem being it's the social construct that for Pākehā whānau, you leave home when you're 18 or whatever, you're going to uni and you carry on and don't come back until it's Sunday for dinner, and there's a lot of of that generation that have got this belief, and it's kind of like what's going to happen in the next near future, because we don't all believe that. Yet the systems may. Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's excellent. So I didn't realize Lucas had made so much progress, and he was just about to release the
the new analysis, so that will be really cool to see. Is he
So-
back from Europe?
No, he just went back to Europe.
Just went back to
actually.
Europe.
He
Okay.
just managed in the hours before he hopped on the flight to get ready for the screening process. So,
See, that's the commitment people are putting into this project.
I want to learn how to make Barrett thing.
Yes.
Okay,
on its own, actually.
Oh,
the time is just about 10 to 1. So the question is, do we want to rejig things again? And did you want to present perhaps after lunch? Because we've got lots of open time after lunch, and the time for after lunch was mostly for discussion, which we're having already. So I think it's going well. So I know, Andrew, there's sort of 10 minutes if you're prepared to give a chat about
What's the prepared?
And this is just to hear about the work that's been done out of the Taranaki, which has been completed on the sort of documenting a Māori life force framework.
So I'm going to keep this brief because this is not my story, right? This is something else, and actually it's a really important story that actually has some really important people and some really important developments and some really important uses. So let's start with the people. Some of the people involved here are kind of pillars of Taranaki society, Taranaki Tūturu. We have Will Edwards, right, former iwi chair. He's also the chair of Aging Well at the moment, and he's just been made the chair of Full of the Māori STEM program as well. He's one of Mason Jury's prodigies. I remember him when he had long dreadlocks and was really, really quiet, and he's neither now. His partner, Mihi Ratsama. Now, Mihi Ratsama was originally at the same school as Barry in the Cargill. And Mihi is also another prodigy at Mason Jury's, but she is a health promotion expert and she's got a PhD in Māori health promotion, and she went all the way out to work with the WHO. Right? And now she's living on with Will on the Papakainga, the power. And then you've got people who, when I saw that they were involved in research, I went, whoa, right? You've got Ruakere Hon, right? And in a Hon Fladmore there. And they are absolutely staunch leaders in Māori development. Tikanga informed development is very flex based, very, very heavily involved with Parihaka as well as Taranaki iwi. And in addition to that, we've got emerging research in Tamati, also from Taranaki and theme here. This is very Taranaki driven, and that driven element is really important. Because what they did here is they did a research project based around an initiative that they started way back in 1994, and that was an initiative for an early childhood centre that isn't necessarily a kohanga, but it's a whānau-based supportive kohanga about rebuilding culture, and that part of Taranaki they got absolutely devastated, right? And a history that will not be unfamiliar to yes, in the corner of the table, that land seized at gunpoint, pretty much everything stripped away. And so they had this idea to rebuild their culture, starting with their children, but not just focused on their children, but actually building it around building up whānau as well. So it wasn't a early childhood centre in a strict